My friends, we live in the dumbest possible timeline. And I mean that. Because only in the dumbest possible timeline could you have news like we've had this week. Some of this has been building up over time. Some of it is brand new. Let's see. We had HR 127, which is basically a bill written by someone who doesn't know the difference between a right and a privilege. That's essentially just trying to take firearms away from poor people. MSNBC's Nicole Wallace suggested using drones on Americans. Something about Jewish space lasers? I mean, okay. You know, and they wonder why she lost her congressional committee seats. Duh. But, and I need to touch on this for a minute. I do have friends in the Jewish community. I reached out to them. I'm like, so guys, space lasers, and they about fell out of their chairs because it is so categorically stupid. And the basic response was, if they exist, why haven't I gotten mine yet? Which I thought was a very classy response to the whole thing. But I can't even. And then this comes out. I have long thought, no, that's not true. I have long heard that America is the new Roman Empire. And I could see some of the allegory, but I didn't really believe it. And I'm like, no, not really. I mean, I can kind of see it, but it really deliberately overlooks things, and the fact that we are still much more democratic than the Roman Republic was, which actually is not overly true, because the Roman Empire was actually fairly democratic. They elected their senators. True, only certain classes of people could be a senator, but they elected their senators. During the Republic, their consul was elected via what we would now consider a parliamentary process. The consul was elected by the Senate. We still elect our president by state. Our states elect our president using the Electoral College, and all of the state legislatures have pretty much delegated the duty of deciding who would be the electors will vote for by a vote of the people. So we are still far more democratic than Rome was, because the emperor, of course, was not elected at all, except maybe by the Praetorian Guard, because, you know, if you piss off the Praetorians, you aren't emperor for very long. However, Time magazine has convinced me we are not the Roman Empire, which I was actually I was looking at it again. I'm like, no, we really are pretty much like the Roman Empire take 7. You had the Roman Republic, and then you had the Roman Empire under Julius Caesar. He was the dictator, which I don't really think was considered an empire at the time. It was still considered a republic, but essentially it was an empire. Then you had the East and Western Roman empires under the emperors, because there was always an emperor in Rome and an emperor in Constantinople. And then when the Western Empire fell, you had the Byzantine period, which is still called the Roman Empire when you're actually there. It's just we call it the Byzantine Empire now because the Western Rome had fallen and Rome was nominally under control of Constantinople. And then you had the Holy Roman Empire, which was neither holy nor Roman, and according to some people, not an empire, but it really was. And now you've got the United States, which follows a lot of the same math. Except for one little problem. We're not the Roman Empire. Time magazine has released an article that has convinced me we're actually the Romulan Empire. And it's funny. I make jokes, but let's talk about this for a minute, because Time magazine released this article. This is the title of the article. Quote from Time magazine: "The secret history of the shadow campaign that saved the 2020 election," unquote. Written by Molly Ball and published on 4 February. There will be a link to this article in the description. This article is so appalling that even the British can't believe what they read. Okay? So, this article is the reason I believe we're in a dystopia. We are in the cyberpunk dystopia. This article, like, encapsulates the whole thing. So buckle up. We're navigating the cyberpunk dystopia. This is the Julien McBain Show. As always, the Julien McBain Show is brought to you by my patrons. So, originally, I wasn't going to read the whole article. But really, it needs to be read. And I'm going to make some comments, because this just blows my mind. See, if I were to say or allege the things that Time Magazine alleges without having a publication like Time Magazine behind me, I get banned off YouTube. I'm serious. Like, everyone I've seen cover this has been extremely careful to mention this. And they are right to, because YouTube will ban you over stuff like this. And honestly, if I was just blasting off at the mouth, I can totally understand why, even though I'm pretty much a free speech absolutist. I think that people should be allowed to say crazy things online, and it should remain up. YouTube has a broadcast standard. I disagree with the broadcast standard in a lot of cases, but if I were just to spout off at the mouth, I know for a fact that this would violate that broadcast standard. So, okay. Time Magazine's Molly Ball. And again, I will link this in the description so you know I am not lying to you. Okay? Quote, "A weird thing happened right after the November 3rd election. Nothing. The nation was braced for chaos. Liberal groups had vowed to take to the streets, planning hundreds of protests across the country. Right-wing militias were girding for battle. In a poll before Election Day, 75% of Americans voiced concern about the violence," unquote. This is actually true. I have seen the polls. I don't remember. I think Rasmussen and Gallup both did polls, and they were roughly around that number. It's a rounded number, but it's accurate. I was actually very concerned about chaos on election night, and when I went to do the Air It Out podcast, I kept my eyes peeled, and as always, I had Greta with me, just in case something psychotic happened. Now, I live in Vermont, so I'm not that worried about it, but at the same time, we're living the dumbest timeline. We do. Quote, "Instead, an eerie quiet descended. As President Trump refused to concede, the response was not mass action, but crickets. When media organizations called the race for Joe Biden on November 7th, jubilation broke out instead as people thronged cities across the U.S. to celebrate the democratic process that resulted in Trump's ouster. A second odd thing happened amid Trump's attempts to reverse the result. Corporate America turned on him. Hundreds of major business leaders, many of whom had backed Trump's candidacy and supported his policies, called on him to concede. To the president, something felt amiss. It was all very strange," Trump said on December 2nd. "Within days after the election, we witnessed an orchestrated effort to anoint the winner, even while many key states were still being counted." Unquote. I know, my Trump impression is awful. Not sorry. Quote, and I quote, I'm going to expressly say this, quoting Time Magazine, "In a way, Trump was right." Unquote. Huh? Quote, "There was a conspiracy," according to Time Magazine, "unfolding behind the scenes, one that both curtailed the protests and coordinated the resistance from CEOs. Both surprises were the result of an informal alliance between left-wing activists and business titans. The pact was formalized in a terse, little-noticed joint statement of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the AFL-CIO published on Election Day," unquote. So, for those of you who don't know, I'm sure you probably all can figure it out, but the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is actually a national nonprofit. They're generally business leaders and CEOs, things of that nature, and they're there to do business. It's actually a great place to do networking if you're in big business. If you have a local chamber of commerce, it's the same idea. They're all nonprofits for the most part. As far as I know, they're all nonprofits, but some towns might have ones that are technically run by the city itself. But this is huge because the AFL-CIO, for my non-American friends, is, I believe, the largest labor union in America. And the Chamber of Commerce and the AFL-CIO, sorry guys, never agree on anything. It's almost as a point of fact. If the Chamber of Commerce says the sky is blue, the AFL-CIO will say, but it's cloudy, so it's white. That's just how it works. That's the way they've worked. They're actually, it's almost as if it's kind of like in Warcraft. We've got the Alliance and the Horde, and they're always fighting each other over something. Basically like that. Quote, both sides would come to see it as an sort of implicit bargain, inspired by the summer's massive, sometimes destructive racial justice protests, which the forces of labor, hang on, I gotta find myself a mob, came together with the forces of capital to keep the peace and oppose Trump's assault on democracy. The handshake between business and labor was just one component of a vast cross-partisan campaign to protect the election. An extraordinary shadow effort, quoting Time magazine, dedicated to not to winning the vote, but ensuring it would be free and fair, credible, and uncorrupted. For more than a year, a loosely organized coalition of operatives, quoting Time magazine, scrambled to shore up America's institutions as they came under simultaneous attack from a remorseless pandemic and an autocratically inclined president. Unquote. There's some obvious framing here. You know, I had a lot of problems with Donald Trump. Autocracy was not one of them. Because he wasn't an autocrat. Quote, though much of this activity took place on the left, it was separate from the Biden campaign and crossed ideological lines, with crucial contributions by nonpartisan and conservative actors. Unquote. I'd have to guess it's probably the Lincoln Project. Quote, the scenario the shadow campaigners were desperate to stop was not a Trump victory. It was an election so calamitous that no result could be discerned at all, a failure of the central act of democratic self-governance that has been a hallmark of America since its founding, unquote. Okay, so I want to comment on this section. A lot of pundits out there, both on the left and the right, are pretty much in agreement that this is actually incorrect. It's either deliberately falsely framed or it is not self-aware, or if you ask some of the people on the right, I'm sure they're going to say it's an outright lie. The fact is, under no circumstances will we not have a clear result. We have a system in place to ensure that in the event the Electoral College cannot, for whatever reason, determine who the president will be, it goes to what they call a contingent election. Okay, now please keep in mind, I am not a lawyer, but I have listened to multiple lawyers on the subject throughout the entire election debacle, and that's pretty much what it was. So what happens is, in all the states vote, they certify their Electoral College slates, they send the electors to Washington, they hand in their votes, the Electoral College votes, they get counted. Under normal circumstances, one candidate will have 270. That person becomes president. Or I should say one ticket will have 270. The person on the ticket in the presidential position will be president. There is a possibility that you'll have 269 to 269. It's never happened, at least not so far as I know. In the event that happens, or in the event neither one makes it to 270 due to decertification of votes or because a state doesn't vote at all, there's dozens of reasons that a state's votes may not be counted or may not exist at all. It might be that that state declined to send electors to the Electoral College, or there might be a strong third party, which has never happened in our history, ever, that prevents any one of them from getting 270 votes. In fact, the last time that was even possible was when Ross Perot ran, and I think Ross Perot did carry a state. Theoretically, if the Libertarian Party can ever get its shit together, it'll be us doing stuff like this. I am not a card-carrying member of the Libertarian Party, but I am a libertarian, as you all know. So I'm gonna label this section as dubious because it doesn't match up with the facts. A contingent election, what happens if no one gets to 270, a contingent election occurs. The House delegation splits off into the respective states, and the state representatives all decide on a person to back. Usually the different reps would vote on which ticket they're going to back, and then they're counted, and whoever got the most votes among that state's delegation to Washington, that state gives that vote to that person. Each state, not each representative, each state gets one vote. There are 50 states, there are 50 votes. That's the way it works. So, and in the event that it's 25 to 25, the vice president would then cast the deciding vote. And this actually could have happened. I believe it was the election of Thomas Jefferson. Because he actually ended up, he was the state refused to certify their own electoral college votes. He counted them anyway, electing, basically making it so he would become the president. This was way back, and Congress is like, let's not let that happen again. So yeah, I'm the honesty of that paragraph to me is dubious. Okay, back to the article. Quoting Time magazine. Their work touched every aspect of the election. They got states to change voting systems and laws and helped secure hundreds of millions in public and private funding, unquote. This terrifies me. There's a word for public-private partnership. Actually, there are two words. One is very outdated, and it's been suggested we should stop using it because it was so abused in the last 4 years, and no one actually knows what it means, that they're actually enacting parts of it in order to prevent it, which is the stupidest thing you can do. So, the historical name for doing shit like this is called fascism. The modern term for it is oligarchy. Going back to the article. Quote, they fended off voter suppression lawsuits, unquote. I really want this investigated. Quote, recruited armies of poll workers and got millions of people to vote by mail for the first time. They successfully pressured social media companies to take a harder line against disinformation and used data-driven strategies to fight viral smears. They executed national public awareness campaigns that helped Americans understand how the vote would unfold over days or weeks, preventing Trump's conspiracy theories and false claims of victory from getting more traction, unquote. But how would they know? Like, how would they know? Quote, after Election Day, they monitored every pressure point to ensure that Trump could not overturn the result. The untold story of the election is that thousands of people from both parties... I'm sorry. I'm going to start that part over. The article is quoting someone. So, with quoting Time magazine, quoting someone else, the untold story of the election is the thousands of people of both parties who accomplished the triumph of American democracy at its very foundation, unquote, from the article. Says Norm Eisen, a prominent lawyer and former Obama administration official who recruited Republicans and Democrats to the board of the Voter Protection Program. Unquote. This needs to be investigated. I mean, they are... The article itself alleges a conspiracy. The article alleges a conspiracy. And even lays out how alleges how it happened. It doesn't matter who won the election, because my party didn't even get 2%. But we need to know that there aren't powers underneath the election making the decisions for us. This is horrendously authoritarian. This is dystopian. This is absolutely dystopian. Yeah. Going back to the article, quote from Time magazine. For Trump and his allies were running their own campaign to spoil the election. The president spent months insisting that mail ballots were a Democratic plot and the election would be rigged. Rigged. Unquote. But isn't that kind of what they're saying? I don't know. Quote, his henchmen at the state level sought to block their use, while his lawyers brought dozens of spurious suits to make it more difficult to vote. An intensification of the GOP's legacy of suppressive tactics. Before the election, Trump plotted to block a legitimate vote count. And he spent the months following November 3rd trying to steal the election he'd lost, with lawsuits and conspiracy theories, unquote, very true, quote, pressure the state and local officials, and finally summoning his army of supporters to the January 6th rally that ended in the deadly violence at the Capitol, unquote. That whole statement is true. He did launched dozens of lawsuits. To quote Andrew Klavan, he's suing everyone, and quoting Andrew Klavan, quote, "Trump is suing everybody. I think he sued me 5 minutes ago," unquote. It was a joke, but it showed what he was doing. And so that's exactly what happened. And because of the temperature continuing to rise, a group of people stormed the U.S. Capitol in what is quite possibly one of the most disastrous events in American history. It's possibly, I won't say it's the most, because we had Pearl Harbor and 9/11, and it was a riot. It was certainly a riot, but it was definitely devastating. It was traumatic to the whole country. Back to the article, Time Magazine, quoting Time Magazine, "The democracy campaigners watched with alarm." Article quotes, "Every week we felt like we were in a struggle to try to pull off this election without the country going through a real dangerous moment of unraveling," end quote, says former GOP Representative Zach Wamp, a Trump supporter who helped coordinate a bipartisan election protection council. Article quotes, "We can look back and say that this thing went pretty well, but it was not at all clear in September and October that it was going to be the case." Article ends quote. "This is the inside story of the conspiracy, according to Time Magazine, to save the 2020 election based on access to the Trump group's inner workings, never before seen documents, and interviews with dozens of those involved across the political spectrum." It is this, heal up here. Where was I? Oh, it is, quote, "It is the story of an unprecedented, creative, and determined campaign whose success also reveals how close the nation came to disaster. Every attempt to," article quotes, "every attempt to interfere with the proper outcome of the election was defeated." Article ends quote, says Ian Basson, I apologize if I messed up your name, co-founder of Protect Democracy, a nonpartisan rule of law advocacy group. But article quotes, "But it's massively important for the country to understand that it didn't happen accidentally. The system didn't work magically. Democracy is not self-executing." Article ends quote. A conspiracy. The dictionary definition of a conspiracy states that it's a criminal act. The article is alleging a conspiracy. We need to investigate. Now, it's entirely possible that what they did was 100% legal. And in fact, if they're publishing it in Time Magazine, I can only assume that it was. But at the same time, why would they describe it as a conspiracy? And there's another word in here that tells me that basically what I would label this as activity akin to what the Tal Shiar did in Star Trek. See, the Tal Shiar was an intelligence agency of the Romulan Empire. It was the intelligence agency of the Romulan Empire. But they were almost a parallel organization to the imperial government. See, the Tal Shiar were a paramilitary intelligence organization that did things like subvert foreign elections, ensured that pro-Tal Shiar senators would vote for a pro-Tal Shiar consul, or praetor, excuse me, they have a praetor. They would ensure that they made sure that the Romulan military had all the information they needed, but not too much. And if they needed to make sure that the person they wanted got the Senate, well then, of course they were far more brutal. People tended to disappear or have accidents. But the whole concept behind it, I'm looking at it, I'm like, this sounds like the Tal Shiar. So what does this mean? Well, the article is long. The article is 6,500 words. And I could be here for an hour and a half reading the whole thing. There are several podcasts out there where they do read the whole thing. I'd recommend going to find one. I don't know what to think about this. I really don't. Some words that the article uses, I'm going to try to find the passage because I want to make sure I have it accurate. because there's a word in here that really, really got me. This is why I liken this to the Tal Shiar, the way the Tal Shiar operated in Star Trek. Well, this one will work just as well. So it's talking about the meetings between the members of this group, right? It says, quote, the meetings became the galactic center for a constellation of operatives across the left who shared overlapping goals but usually didn't work in concert. The group had no name, no leaders, and no hierarchy, but kept the disparate actors in sync. Article quotes, Pod played a critical behind-the-scenes role in keeping different pieces of the movement, infrastructure, and communication aligned. And article ends quote says Maurice Mitchell, National Director of the Working Families Party. Article quotes, you have litigation space, the organizing space, the political people focused on the W, meaning the win, and their strategies aren't always aligned. He allowed this ecosystem to work together. Article ends quote. Constellation of operatives. I really like that term, actually. That's really creative. But again, it definitely plays into the whole Star Empire visual I'm getting of this, right? I'll admit, when I first... Because I was listening to a podcast where they read the article in its entirety. And in spite of myself, I laughed. I did. Because it's just so absurd. It is. It is just so absurd. But it's in Time magazine. And there is a word in here that really got to me. I can't find it. I wanted to give you the exact context of it. But the article states, the Time magazine article states, and I'm paraphrasing, that it was a cabal. They used the word cabal. Like, I want to find the sentence in here so I can give it to you. And I was like, did Alex Jones write this? I mean... I wanted to laugh. And then I realized that, no, it's just reaffirms what I've been saying for over a year. We're in a dystopia. And they're not even hiding it. They're saying the quiet part out loud. So what do we do moving forward? And honestly, I don't know. It's obvious that... the powers that be have decided that they are going to keep the reins of power. And, I mean, they've had the power for 100 years, so I guess they're kind of doing things well enough to keep us all alive, I guess, right? Do I think we need to accept it? No. You know, if the Wall Street Rebellion taught me anything, and the stock did exactly what everyone thought it was going to do. It skyrocketed and then it crashed. Like I said back in that podcast, I consider that spent money. And I hope if any of you did it, you also considered it spent money and weren't looking to make money off of it. A lot of good came from it. Because it showed that we still have a modicum of power, although regulators are quickly moving in to make sure that can't happen again. So... what can we do? We can at least be self-aware. We are self-aware. If you're watching this, I would hope that you realize that what I say is not hyperbole for the most part. I'm taking what I see and what I read because I've got one ear on the news all day long. All day, every day. I'm lucky enough to have a job where there's a lot of time where I don't have to be on the phone and I can listen to podcasts while I'm doing my usually very repetitive work. Be informed. Watch alternative media. I don't care if you watch Tim Pool, or if you watch The Young Turks, or if you watch The Daily Wire, or you watch The Blaze, or whatever. You know, Shoe on Head, Hell World, which, by the way, is hilarious. I love Shoe on Head's Hell World. Watch them all. Get different perspectives. Make an informed judgment. And I'm going to ask you for a favor. I'm not going to ask you to patron me, although it's appreciated. I am going to ask that you share this video. I have decided to stick my neck out and try to be a torch in the darkness. You may not agree with my opinions, and that's fair. I'm sure a lot of you are going to disagree with my next podcast, which is going to be on HR 127. But the fact is that YouTube doesn't like it when people push back against the machine, because they're part of the machine, run by Google. And so I have noticed my subs dropping from an average of 24 in a 28-day period to 4. That's not a joke. This is in the last 8 weeks. And this is why I considered moving the podcast to a different channel or doing something different, because I'm not getting subs anymore. But if you share the video, you beat the algorithm. So please, throw it up on Twitter. If you enjoy my work. If you don't enjoy my work, don't do it. But hit the like button. Comment. Share it to your social media. Because that's how I'm going to grow now. And that's the best thing, that's the most powerful thing you can do for me. I have the feeling that by the time I'm eligible for partner program, they'll state I'm not eligible for partner program. Which is a shame, because I've been working for years at this. And maybe I will. Maybe I'm not too far over the line because I'm a libertarian and not whatever they decide is the criteria for not being monetizable. But in any case, I'm going to keep doing this. And I hope that you are along for the ride. It occurs to me that I once again forgot to go back to my other screen. As I mentioned earlier, my next podcast will be on HR 127, which is a sweeping firearms control proposal. And what I mean sweeping, it's egregious. But as I'm reading it, I realized they're not trying to take firearms away from everyone. They're just trying to make it cost prohibitive so that only the poor can't have them. And this is what we're going to be facing for however long we face it. So, I know this wasn't my typical fare. I had to cover it because my mind was just completely blown. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Please like, share, and subscribe down below. We are on the road to 13 million subscribers, one subscription at a time, so make sure you subscribe. As always, everyone, I really appreciate the support, and a huge thank you to my patrons. You make this all possible. We'll see you in the next one. The Julien McBain Show is a McBain Manor production. I am your host, Julien McBain. My moderators for live shows are Kat, Jay Lambertson, and Captain Aubrey. And a huge thank you to my patrons, Red Kryptonite, Jay Lambertson, and Spectrum 3600, without whose support this would not be nearly as possible. If you want to be a patron, please go to patreon.com/Julien McBain. You will get exclusive content, access to certain ebooks, and to at least a once-a-month exclusive podcast of the Julien McBain Show. Thank you so much for joining, and we will see you next time.